26 straight losses, almost a year and a half without a single win. The 1976 and 1977 Tampa Bay Bucks have to be the worst team in NFL history, if not a close second, if you want to argue the 2008 Lions. But how bad were they? And why? They were bad. After the 0-14 1976 season, Coach John McKay told the team, "Stop by my office tomorrow and pick up some fake noses and mustaches so no one recognizes your sorry asses." This man, Coach McKay, had a great sense of humor, which certainly helped him deal with the team's performance. Upon being hired, he said all he could promise was he would beat Pittsburgh's timetable, meaning the Steelers, who took 41 years to win their first championship. His most memorable line was when he was asked about the team's execution, and he said, "I'm in favor of it." After being destroyed by the Steelers 42-0 in 1976, he was asked if he was embarrassed by the loss. His response, "I was embarrassed before we came here." And when analyzing how they could actually win, he said, "We've determined that we can't win at home and we can't win on the road. What we need is a neutral site." Despite his humor, the reality was depressing. The all-time record for consecutive losses is held by the Chicago Cardinals, who lost 29 straight from 1942 to 1945. But in the Super Bowl era, only one team has even got to 20 consecutive losses, the Jags in 2020 to 2021. Now, the Bucs were an expansion team. We have to cut them some slack. That's why you could argue the 08 Lions were worse. It's hard to build from scratch, especially back then, and it usually took a few years. But the Bucs were historically awful. Fellow expansion team, the Seattle Seahawks, came into existence in 1976 as well, and while not elite, they fared better. As a Sports Illustrated article put it, you could count on two hands the Bucs who were good enough to play past college. The second worst start for an expansion team was the Cowboys in 1960, who lost their first 10. Without free agency, the Bucs' options included the last few guys on a team's roster, an expansion draft, and the regular draft, which was pretty weak that year. The players in the expansion draft were made available only 72 hours before and included a lot of medical rejects, although they did get a few good players. Future Hall of Famer Leroy Salmon was the Bucs' first pick in the draft, Pat Toomey, defensive end, won a Super Bowl with the Cowboys, and Larry Ball, linebacker, who played with the undefeated Dolphins. But it didn't help their owner, Hugh Culverhouse, was a penny pincher. He had a vending machine in the locker room, no free drinks. The plane wouldn't have AC until it took off. It was like an oven. Players' phone calls weren't covered during away games. On the road, players would share a room, and if someone made a call, he billed both roommates. Obviously, if you lose 26 straight, you have to be bad. They averaged 8.9 points per game in 1976 and 7.4 in 1977. They actually won a preseason game in 1976, 17-3 against the Falcons, but according to Coach McKay, the team had to reset in the regular season. They spent the preseason figuring out the veterans they wanted to keep, but determined most of the younger players were better, so they kind of cleared house. The first game would set the tone for their 26-game losing streak. They got lost in the Houston Oilers stadium when leaving the locker room. It took them 20 minutes to find their way onto the field, just about making it for kickoff. The team didn't score until their third game, and didn't score a touchdown until their fourth. And that was a defensive touchdown. Cornerback Danny Reese returned a fumble for 44 yards. When talking about the offense, Danny Reese said, "There were times he would have killed for a 3 and out. A lot of times it was 1 and out because the offense would just give it away." And it starts with the quarterback. In 1976, they were led by Steve Spurrier, who threw 7 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. But he was not helped by the non-existent offensive line, who allowed 50 sacks in 1976 and 48 in 1977. During these 2 years, they had 6 starting quarterbacks. Of those, only Gary Huff played in the NFL a season after starting for the Bucs. In 1976, they were held under 20 points in 13 of their 14 games. To be fair to the defense, they lost 4 times when allowing 10 or fewer points in 1977. They only allowed 20 plus points 4 times and 30 plus just twice. The offense was truly abysmal, scoring 125 points in a season, the lowest in the Super Bowl era. So the defense had to spend an excessive amount of time on the field. This, along with overly intense training, would lead to a lot of injuries. In 1976, 17 players were placed on injured reserve. The Bucs also had a negative 287 point differential, the worst in NFL history. They were shut out 5 times in 1976. That record would be broke in 1977 though, by the Bucs, who were shut out 6 times that year. The Bucs would manage to break their losing streak in December 1977, beating the Saints 33-14, and then win the final game of the year against the Cardinals, finishing the season a strong 2-12. What was extremely impressive about the Bucs story is that they turned it around in 1979, making it to the NFC Championship game, ultimately falling 9-0 to the Rams, largely thanks to QB Doug Williams. But cheapskate that he was, Hugh Culverhouse would not pay Williams, so he ended up leaving in 1983. The Bucs wouldn't get back to the playoffs till 1997. Coach McKay said in 1976, "We'll be back. Maybe not this century, but we'll be back." How right he was, because they'd win the Super Bowl in the 21st century, but history can never be erased. Alright, thanks for watching.